Hello and welcome back to the Nasty Metal Production channel here at YouTube. Wow, it's definitely been quite a while since I've been back on YouTube doing a video. I just in front of the camera basically, and I kind of posted like a community post, somewhat kind of saying why, but not really because of again. It just kind of deals with more personal stuff, and I don't think you guys really are that interested in anything personally. But again, sometimes though, if you really think about it, it's always a good thing to really take time away, being off of the camera, at least being off of YouTube, and just at least think about everything, sometimes it's always good to do so. It's healthy, and I think it was much needed for me, really. I needed some time away off of YouTube. But I'm back, and with a much more unique sort of video, something I've never done before, and something I've kind of thought about for a real long time, something that's just been back in my head creatively. Mercy playing the background Witchburner, one of my favorite Swedish doom albums. So yeah, this has been something that has been in the back of my mind for a real long time, and it probably was really due to a former VC member, someone who hasn't been on YouTube in so far a pretty long time, that being Annie's Vinyl Den. But what I'm here is, and to do, because I don't want to completely go off the beaten track here, and this is inspired also recently from picking more comic books up recently. So I kind of been thinking about doing some comic book sort of pickup videos because of this. However, I don't want to completely just get in front of the camera and just show what I've recently picked up and not tell you why I'm getting into doing comic books for some of this channel. At least something brand new to add in besides just music and other bullshit. But I have to kind of at least give you an understanding why I'll be doing comic books in the first place, and what better way to start than showing you a selective, just a selective bunch or stack, whatever, of comics I've had for a long time. Because again, with me, you probably shouldn't be that surprised that I was a comic book reader a long time ago. And way before I even started getting, hit with the music bug. I mean, around the time I was, as a little kid, reading comics, I was still, getting into some of my favorite bands like AC/DC, Judas Priest, Motorhead. I even throw in early Def Leppard when I was really in a big kick with them. Kiss, of course. Black Sabbath. Dio, and just Saxon and such, but I just kind of got out of buying, at least kind of got out of buying new comic books by the time I pretty much moved up here, and there was a couple of the last sort of new comic books I've at least had gotten since, around 2008, basically, the last when I started buying them. But by 2009, it was all music and stuff, so I never really had stepped foot inside a comic book shop since 2008. Or was it either 2008 or 2007? One of those. But I've been thinking 2008 when I was beginning living up here in Susanville. And now that comic book shop that I stepped into was in Reno, because there wasn't really one here in Susanville till a few years ago, when there is a comic book shop, and it's most recently, since being back in Susanville that I've been frequently going there picking up comics. But before I get to showing anything that I picked up from that shop, I gotta show you what I've had in my collection for a long time. So, since I'm gonna be splitting this up into 2 videos, figured I'd do a video here, this being the first one, on basically comic books that would be more interesting to at least the heavy metal, hard rock music fan. So there's definitely a couple of sort of metal, hard rock related comics in here, or even comic books that was drawn by a certain individual who has at least contributed to at least a few metal albums, and of course even involved doing, well, figures based around Kiss and so on. So and even Alice Cooper. And speaking of Alice Cooper, the first one I'm going to be showing here, the first 2 should be no brainer here. What we have here is Marvel Premiere number 50, which is the infamous Alice Cooper comic book that Marvel had published in like 1977 or 78. Going on a limb and saying at least, obviously around the time period of From the Inside, which this comic book is inspired by, is the story of From the Inside. Again, this has been shown by plenty of VC members to begin with, but again, it's an iconic comic book to begin with. Again, based on, well, everyone's favorite shock rocker, Alice Cooper. So, obviously had to show that off. Speaking of more Alice Cooper, here is the Rock and Roll Comics number 18, which is on Alice Cooper as well. Again, obviously taking inspiration from the Welcome to My Nightmare album. This would have been around the period of Trash, and eventually I think even leading to like Hey Stupid. So during the sort of his supposed, hair metal period. But it's because of this comic book is how I ended up finding out at a really younger age of the very first 2 Alice Cooper band albums, that being Prettiest for You and Easy Action. It was the first time I ever heard of those 2 albums, and that's what kind of led me to my sort of fantasization of wanting to actually listen to those. And once I finally did, those were definitely a freaking trip. But definitely, this was my introduction to even finding out any of those really early Alice Cooper band albums, besides knowing about Love It to Death, Killer, which I obviously was exposed to really early around this period when I've discovered this comic book in the first place. But yeah, of course, by the way, a little nod to $1 Billion Babies. So, of course, this is what makes more sense starting off this sort of comic book video with Alice Cooper. Big fan of his to begin with and seen him in concert. Speaking of rock and roll comics, here is number 1, which is, of course, was based on around Guns N' Roses. So, really cool to begin with, of course. This, again, I had this around 2008 and was showing a couple more here, too. Especially related to a band. It's on my t-shirt here. And by the way, I am definitely looking out for any other rock and roll comic stuff, mostly the ones on AC/DC, Whitesnake, Queensryche, Motorhead, even Aerosmith, and so on. I'm definitely looking out for those specific rock and roll comics titles. So definitely those are, at some point, will make it to the collection, but I'm definitely looking for those. But yeah, here, Rock and Roll Comics number 1, Guns N' Roses. And here we go. Speaking of 2008 comics that I've had since then, well, it is the Kiss 4K Legends Never Die, and it's funny, I have 2 here. I didn't pick up the first 4. I only went with 2, and you should understand why. This, of course, is the Kiss 4K Legends Never Die number 2, and of course, Gene Simmons being on the front. And this definitely is around the period that they were leading into doing Sonic Boom, obviously. So, Kiss 4K number 2, and then eventually here is number 4, actually. Here's number 4, and doesn't take a no genius to why I would have picked this up in the first place. It's because of, even though it's around this period, it would have been Tommy Thayer that would have been sporting the spaceman look. But we all know it is Ace Frehley. So, there you go. And I haven't read these in, like, ages. I have any of these comics. It's been a long time since I've read any of these two. And so I can't remember much of the story. But still, as a kid, I had to at least have, or at least a teen, a really early teen would be more appropriate for this period. But still, I had to kind of have them when I walked into the shop. I had to at least have some couple Kiss comics. So there you go. And again, personal collection. And here we go. Speaking of when it comes to Kiss and, of course, action figures, if there was one individual who was most connected or whatever doing Kiss figures in the late 90s, it would have been none other than the Spawn creator, Todd McFarlane. And again, that would be around the time of the Psycho Circus album. And so, what do I have here? Again, this being from my personal collection of Spawn comics. And these are definitely, most of these are originals from when I was pretty much reading them. So what we have here is number 1. And again, if you're not familiar with Spawn as far as the comics are concerned, but if you're familiar with, of course, metal music in general, then you might have probably heard about the Dark Saga by Iced Earth, which was an album that it was, well, based around the whole story and character of Spawn. And since when that album was released, it would have been around probably issue number 45, 46. So it still had been going, and it still is going to this day. I have definitely some much, much later Spawn comics in my collection, but again, this is all from my personal. So again, I don't have to really go into too much of the story about Spawn because, well, let's be honest, it's a daunting sort of story. Other than, if I have to go through brief, it's obviously based around a guy who was named Al Simmons, who was a military soldier and so on, hired to kill by the government. And obviously, as he started, let's just say, discovering darker secrets that they were doing, they thought he was getting too close, kill him off. He makes a deal with the devil, and, well, he gets brought back as Spawn. And that'll been like 5 years later in comic book continuity. Yeah, there you go. That's a brief. And of course, he begins battling the battles between heaven and hell, basically. So, here's my number 1 right here. And of course, next up, again, from my personal reading collection, number 5, which this would have been the first appearance of the child killer Billy Kincaid. There you go. Number 5 again, not in the greatest shape. This is definitely these days. It had seen better days. I don't think you can really see much, but there's definitely a bit of a slight tear somewhere. It'll be around there. So it has seen better days, but again, it had gotten a lot of love. But yeah, number 5. This is actually more of an upgrade to a much slightly higher grade, but it is number 7, because I didn't really, as a kid, I didn't have at least, number 2, 3, 4, 6, 8, and so on, at least the first 10, if we're going on. I didn't really have any of some of those. I do have them now, but again, it would kind of be out of place given that this is more about running through stuff that, well, was part of my personal collection a long time ago when I was reading them as a kid. But yeah, so Spawn number 7, one of an iconic cover to begin with, and the only Spawn cover to not be signed by Todd McFarlane. So there you go. Here we go is number 9, which is the first appearance of Angela Cagliostro and Cagliostro, and even Medieval Spawn, the Sir John of York, which he'd be on the cover right there. That'd be Medieval Spawn. And this is the sole Spawn comic to be, I believe this is the sole Spawn comic to be written by Neil Gaiman, who is best known for doing the Sandman comics in the for the Vertigo line. There you go. Again, great artwork to begin with. So, this really is one of my personal favorite Spawn books, along with like number 7 and number 1. You know, these were definitely some of my favorites growing up. And speaking of, let's get into number 10. I keep forgetting the guy who actually had wrote this one, but it would be the creator for this guy named Cerebus. And this again takes place after the events of number 9, where Spawn picks up her sai or something, her little stick that where I guess she transports herself from. Because again, if obviously not being that familiar with the Spawn lore and Angela in general, she was basically a Hellspawn hunter sent from heaven. So with her sort of weapons that have powers to them, he picks it up. Cagliostro, of course, tells him, don't press it, don't press it. He presses it, and he gets sucked into a different dimension, and this is the dimension that he ends up being put into. And this book was a big excuse just to take more jabs at all of both Marvel and DC, basically for not allowing their creators to really own the characters that they created and so on. So that's all this ended up being used for. And again, if you know the story of why Image comic books was created in the first place, it was because of they were, again, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, Mark Silvestri, and yada 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 were definitely not happy with how they were getting treated, at least financially and mentally, by Marvel Comics. And they wanted to kind of make a change, so that's why they ended up forming Image in the first place. And this book was just another excuse of explaining how they felt about the whole industry in the first place, on not allowing creators to not own the characters that they created and so on. There you go. And by the way, that is one of my favorites too along there. Finally, here we go, is to the last of the Spawn books I'm showing. It's number 14. Again, this has seen much better days, but again, this was obviously one that was read a lot. So, number 14 by Spawn. Again, I hadn't read some of these, but I've been kind of rereading them anyways, but it's just been years since I've read some of these. But again, I just love the Spawn character in general, and again, I've got a lot of Spawn comics to begin with. I've definitely got plenty of Spawn comics, and again, a lot of the later ones. So, at some point, I'll definitely do a Spawn collection video, but for now, this is just I'm just showing you a select, stack of the Spawn comics that I at least had read when I was either a kid or much later as a teen. So here we go. Speaking of one finally from the last bunch, but this is not really a solo Spawn book, but it is definitely one of the more infamous crossovers. That is Spawn Batman, the collaboration between Todd McFarlane and Frank Miller. Again, Frank Miller also was best known for drawing some classic Batman books, including The Dark Knight. So this was that. And I know there are definitely some people that will kind of, I wouldn't say trash the book, but definitely some that definitely would say this is one of the most overrated books, though. But for me, it's a guilty pleasure. I kind of love reading this to begin with. So, again, this has seen much better days, too. But again, I loved reading this a lot. So, it's why it's in here. It's one of my personal favorite comics in general. So, Spawn Batman. Now, from the Spawn, let's get into another character who has actually been immortalized within heavy metal in general. Judge Dredd. So far, my sole Judge Dredd book that I'm showing within here. I have another one, but I don't really have a whole lot, which is kind of crazy because I do like Judge Dredd. But I just, for some reason, finding Judge Dredd books here in the U.S. isn't really that easy for me. But still, I've always loved it. And again, everyone knows I Am the Law from Anthrax, so I just felt like it had to be shown in here. It belongs in as part of this video. But again, this is from my original old collection. I've had this since a kid. It's not a high grade, nor is it a complete low grade, but it's still decent. I've read this one a lot. This would have been like, was it issue number 6? This from like December or so. Maybe was it December? Somewhere in 1986. Even though it's definitely more of a holiday issue, but I don't think this was actually pressed in December. But yeah, there we go. Judge Dredd. Finally, this is more movie related, and I've got a lot of this character, but I'm just going to show it anyways. I've got a lot, though, from his Toxic Avenger. I felt like I'll show this for any of those who are movie buffs, especially horror movie buffs and trauma in general. So this is the Marvel Comics Toxic Avenger number 2. Or issue number 2 would be the preferred way to pronounce it. I had number 1. I might still have it with me. It's just, I don't know where I put it. But I still got most of the Toxic Avenger books with me. And even including Toxic Crusaders as well. The one where they decide they're going to make Toxic Avenger into more of a kid-friendly character. And pair him up with a couple different characters, whatever, and make them as a team. So yeah, I have some of those, and those are Marvel too. So there you go. But again, I just felt like I'll just show number 2 as a selective book from my personal Toxic Avenger / Crusader collection. There you go. Again, just for the movie buffs. Alright, so there you go. There's at least a select bunch of my personal sort of comics, at least music, metal related, movie shit, whatever sort of comics I had read since I was pretty young and had for a long time. So if you have any sort of comments on any of these I show, because I gotta definitely close this because I'm gonna film basically the other part on just other Marvel stuff. So figured I'd split them up. Feel like whatever you choose you want to watch, you could watch this one again. But so if you didn't want to like try and sit through and have me just show a bunch of other random Marvel comic stuff, that if you're just stuff you may not be that interested in, I just felt like I might as well do a video where I just show most of the ones that might be of interest to you. So there you go. So again, just comic books that would be geared towards the hard rock and metal fan. So there you go. I'll see you in the second part of this. So until then, hope you enjoyed. Take care.